Just a friendly reminder, the October Patreon prize giveaway is coming up at the end of the month. If you've yet to register, head over to WTSPWorldWar2.com, click on the Patreon link, sign up and subscribe. All you have to do is be a paid active subscriber. At the end of the month, we're going to pick the winner for this month's prize, which is a beautiful prize pack provided by our friends over at $17.91 Everyday Carry, valued over $100, containing different items from $17.91 Everyday Carry, including multi-tool carriers, flashlight carriers, the items you need to release the bulk from your pocket from the daily items you must carry to complete your job. For more information, head over to d-410.com/1791 EDC. Once again, all you have to do to get your name entered into the prize pack giveaway is go to WTSPWorldWar2.com, click on the Patreon link, sign up and subscribe. You have to be an active subscriber by the end of the month. Your name will automatically be entered into the prize pack giveaway.
Oh, hey, Dennis, I found out a guy I work with has a Japanese sword from a Japanese officer's sword. He showed me a picture of it, and it's one of the mass-produced ones because you can see the brass sheet metal on the scabbard. And we're wondering about how to get it back to, or see if it belongs to anybody. He's going to bring it in one day.
I've got the perfect person.
Yeah?
Daniel King.
Daniel King?
Daniel King.
Okay.
He's written, he's fluent in Japanese, and he's written all kinds of books about the from the Japanese perspective. And he's returned many flags and items to families in Japan. And he's here in Texas. He was on our podcast. You should listen to his that episode. It was pretty awesome.
For some reason, I got a flashback from something I've seen somewhere. It may be an old episode of American Pickers, but I think maybe they used to stamp something underneath the handguard, like if they removed it underneath the shank.
Yeah. Well, see, that's when my grandfather brought one back, and we took it apart. And on the tang,
the tang
there was like 3 or 4 kanji letters, I guess you call them, and then there was a serial number, and we were able to I think he went to the embassy in Houston. Well, I think it was in Houston, where he wrote the embassy, and they directed him to a individual. He gave them the serial number and was able to connect them that way. But I don't know if that's still possible, or if there's a better way to get it back to families.
I'll ask Dan. I'll get you in touch with Dan.
Well, as long as the Hall of the Empire didn't burn down in 1973, they should have find it.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Like ours.
Yeah. You guys ready to get started?
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Here we go.
Digital 410 Media proudly presents the What's the Scuttlebutt podcast with your hosts, Don Abernathy, Jeff Copsetta, and Dennis Blocker.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of the What's the Scuttlebutt podcast, your favorite World War II-based podcast. Welcome to another new episode. We are back after, a long 2 weeks for those of us in the path of Helene and Milton. Our hearts and minds and souls and prayers go out to those of you in North Carolina and Tennessee and Georgia affected by the devastation that was Helene.
Brutal.
And then those of us in Florida, particularly those of you in Bradenton and Tampa, being a member of the Florida Historical Preservation Society myself, a large number of our Florida-based World War II reenactors live in that area. And so prayers to those of you. I know most of you came out relatively unscathed, but some of you did suffer a little bit of damage here and there. And so thoughts and prayers to all of you. We have a guest tonight, and as we tend to do, we allow the person who booked the guest and who has the relationship with the guest to introduce the guest. And so without me saying guest one more time in the last 38 seconds, Dennis, why don't you introduce our
guest? Our guest tonight is Roger Gray, a longtime friend of mine for a couple decades. And interesting reason for him to be with us tonight. And, the grand architect in creating humans. And we've talked about this before. Deposits within the heart and soul of some a spark that ignites within them a desire, even a necessity to archive their family's history. And in some, it's the history of those who perhaps sacrificed on their behalf, or maybe it's because of, the spark that we have the works of Caesar and Marcus Aurelius from long, long ago. And thank God for that, because we would have not have any of those historical, written records without these. Today, we call them historians. The vast majority, though, have no degree or certification labeling them as such. They are historians all the same. And because of these multitudes through the years, we know what it was like to take the Oregon Trail. And we know what it was like cutting through and snatching, grabbing vines through the Congo. We know what it felt like and sounded like and how cold it was to survive the sinking of the Titanic. We know how amazing it was to sit at the feet of Lincoln. And it behooves us to sit at the feet of those who have answered this call to preserve those stories. Roger Gray is one of those who, fueled by that spark, went on to uncover and make known the story of a hero of his grandfather. And he grew to esteem him very highly. So it's with great pride that I introduce to you and welcome to the podcast, my good friend of decades, Roger Gray. Roger, thanks for joining us.
Well, thanks for having me. It's an honor to be here. I'm really excited. This is a great opportunity.
Have you always loved history?
From early on, I've always been fascinated with, the knights in shining armor and just, anything to do with history. Matter of fact, I think it was in 8th grade. I got real sick. I was hospitalized with mono, and I read the Rise and Fall of the Roman Empire in 8th grade. Yeah, among other books. But I've always been fascinated with history.
My goodness. How long did that take you to read that?
Oh, it was
remember?
probably a month, I think. Yeah, it was because, there were some big words in boring sections, but hey,
I just want to point out before we pass over what may be a little nothing. You're talking about how you got mono, you're bedridden, and that got you into history. How much rediscovery of history or correction of history has come from those who were bedridden? Because after all, we remember 6 years ago, the correction of the Iwo Jima statue in a photo because a guy had a kidney removed and he was laid up in bed for the hospital. And he was he was a historian and he was looking through different documentation. Like, wait a minute, this cat from this photo 4 hours later has on the exact same gear as the person who is then identified as somebody. Just because he happened to look at 2 different pieces of documentation, had 2 different photos of 2 different gentlemen, he sorted out this huge misidentification that's been going on for 80 years, all because he had a kidney removed and he was laid up in bed with nothing better to do.
That's interesting. Well, I'd always been sick. I had asthma and all that stuff as a little kid. So, certain times of the year I couldn't go outside. I couldn't go outside because of pollen and all that stuff. So I stayed inside and read, and it was always like, King Arthur's tales and, anything to do with history. And yeah, I don't know. Of course, I read books like Conan and H.G. Wells and stuff, but, it was, I was always drawn to things that have happened. And it's, I think I mentioned to Dennis, the thing that draws me about history now is I like to find out, when something happened, I like to know why it happened, and then the actual event, and then what that did later on. What was the ripple effects afterwards, and how it all ties together, because they're all linked. Events are always linked together.
Yeah, it's like Jeff often says on this show, if you want to learn about World War II, you really need to start with World War I because that's
true.
I was going to say stipulations, but the results of the peace treaty that came out of World War I that directly influenced and led to World War II.
Correct.
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
that's very true.
This episode is brought to you by our friends over at Fume. Fume cartridges are crafted from medical-grade polyester designed for use with essential oils. Fume, a non-vape, non-nicotine, non-tobacco device, works by replacing the hand-to-mouth fixation, calming nervous tension through fidgeting, and distracts you from the bad habits with delicious flavors. Psychologists have shown stopping a bad habit cold turkey is very hard for your brain. The Fume handheld device has a built-in fidget, also has a weight similar to most vape pens. If you're interested in replacing old bad habits with new good habits, head on over to tryfume.com/D410M and get yourself a free pack of toppers with your purchase. The toppers is a perfect new accessory designed with your comfort in mind. Slip it onto the mouthpiece for a softer, warmer feel. So replace those old habits with a new habit, a good habit. Simply go to tryfume.com/D410M. That's tryfume.com/D410M.
Roger, were you? Did you make models? I think most of us when we were young, growing up, made models of tanks, and then took like I know that I would put like get the oven on the stove top, and then heat up a knife, and then slice into a panzer, and make some some damage or whatever. Did you do any of that stuff?
Yeah, actually, my favorite was to build aircraft. I built a lot of like the Stuka and Focke-Wulf, other ones, but I built a couple ships, and ironically, I built an LCI and landing craft infantry. It's a model made by Lindbergh, and I remember I was either working on it or I had just finished it and I was painting it, and my granddad, he walks in and I said, "Look at this ship I just built." He looks at it, had the weirdest look on his face, and then he just walked off.
Huh.
At the time I was offended. I was like, "Well, I built this. I'm proud of it, and you just walked off." Little did I know, So
it's interesting. It's interesting you say that, because I have a flashback to like Christmas 1983, my basement of my grandparents' home. As our listeners know, my grandfather did grave registration over in Europe, World War II.
Oh goodness.
I got this new sweet toy I asked for. It was a G.I. Joe Jeep, straight up Willys Jeep. And I remember I opened that, and there was, because on the boxes they had the illustrated a version of the toy that was inside with the action scene. And I remember it was blazing red background. You had the Jeep driving, and G.I. Joe scrolled across the top, and I showed my grandpa, and he just, that same look, he didn't like walk away, but he definitely didn't share the same enthusiasm, because I never thought about it, but could you imagine how weird it had to be from that generation, 40 years later, the vehicle that he rode in to go clean up his comrades and his counterparts is now a toy, an action figure toy for entertainment of your grandchildren, and how bizarre that had to be. I mean, it's one thing to have the little army men, but to actually have cartoons and G.I. Joes, and imagine if they were at a cognitive, I'm sure a lot of them are, but we know how they felt with Saving Private Ryan, but to sit down and like watch modern day versions of Call of Duty and Battlefield, it's just, it has to be weird.
Yeah.
It has to be bizarre to think that this horrible atrocity that you've lost so many friends with is now a form of entertainment for your grandchildren and great grandchildren.
I can kind of identify with that. I was in search and rescue, PJ, and my son came home from the store with his mother, and he had an action figure, and it was a PJ, and it just really struck me odd. I looked at it and I was like, at first I just kind of shook my head. I was like, "No, we didn't wear that gear," But then it was like, okay. So he knew I didn't like it, and he just put it up. Never took it out and played with it. But it's weird.
I felt kind of left in the dark. My parents are buying me these G.I. Joes. I remember back in the day, they're $3.50 a piece for an action figure. Hawkeye. Oh, Hawk, the main G.I. Joe. On the back, they have his civilian name. And his last name's Abernathy. My last name is Abernathy. And no one ever said, "Hey, Don, this guy's got the..." Professor
He's family.
Abernathy on Chili Willy. We had the same last name. No one made a big deal about it. I was 35 before I found out the Hawk and G.I. Joe had the same last name as me. Just saying, they could have pointed it out.
That's great. Yeah.
Hey, Roger, I was
Yeah.
wondering, when was it, you're building models and you're reading history and all that. When was it that you realized for the first time that you actually had a significant participant in these events around you this whole time since you were born? And when was that? When did that occur?
Oh, I don't know. You have these family legends, of your grandfather did this in the Pacific. I knew he had been a sailor. I knew he had been in the Pacific. And I always thought, oh, that was cool. We'd watch war movies and the sands of Iwo Jima and all that. And I'm think, oh, he was there. Um, but I really didn't know, I guess, until
Well, you had like episodes, right? That you would see that like that one Stark episode I remember you telling me about was
yeah.
you guys were roofing. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, my grandparents built a home in East Texas, just about an hour and a half north of Houston, and it was on the flight path of a Courier jet from Ellington Air Force Base to I believe the Air Force Base outside of Shreveport. So we were up there roofing. I was about 16 at the time, 15 or 16, and that jet flew over and let off a sonic boom. And he did the whole sailor shuffle. I mean, just looked like a goalie going after a ball. And my dad and I reached out and grabbed him, and it blew my mind. I just really started riding ambulance as an explorer scout, so I kind of knew, you know, shell shock and all that. And it didn't click until my dad pulled me aside later and said, "Yeah, he saw some stuff, you know, he saw a lot of combat, and so we have to watch that. Like when they would go hunting, sometimes you'd have to stay in camp. He wouldn't go out when the guns were going and stuff."
Yeah, that scene
So
there.
yeah,
Everybody remembers that scene from the Pacific with Eugene Sledge at the end where he can't go dove hunting.
right, right.
Um, Now this brings up an interesting what how do you feel about because your grandfather, my grandfather, Don, and for our listeners, they actually fought side by side at Tinian, and
Yeah, yeah. We just found that out yesterday.
yeah,
Yeah,
and Roger's grandfather was on the LCIG 454,
right.
and my grandfather was on the LCIG 449, and we found out that they were side by side through many campaigns, tied up alongside each other from time to time in the same flotilla, Flotilla 3. Now, your grandfather, my grandfather, through documentation, through eyewitness accounts, we both know that they saw some horrific combat and they saw a lot of really bad stuff.
They
How
really
do
did.
you feel as a veteran yourself? We saw some combat. How do you feel about those guys who are verbose about talking about their experiences and they're very you know what I mean? It's almost like they brag about
Bragging. Yeah, yeah.
how
I,
does that strike you? Because my
you know, it's
grandfather and your grandfather didn't talk about it.
they wouldn't talk about it. No, they
And
wouldn't
they
talk about
really saw some bad
it.
stuff.
And and I don't like talking about it. I'll only well, you and I have talked and about stuff, but I I think those guys and even the guys in Vietnam, they were they were there to do a job. They were there to fight for the country. A lot of them didn't think they were coming home. They'd wake up in the morning and say, "This is my last day." You know, this could be my last day. And I think that it was so horrific for them that they just didn't want to talk about it because it brought up stuff. Whereas a lot of these guys that brag about it, especially the modern day military, I seem to see that more in them than I do in our World War II vets and Vietnam vets. And I think it's just because these what did you call them? Crayola eaters. Remember that? A
Yeah,
lot of them.
yeah, the
That's what they
crayon
do.
eaters,
That's
just
yeah. That's what they're
warriors.
trained. Yeah, that's what they're trained to do.
Well, let me
You know, they
ask you
can hardly.
because I don't know, and I tend to personally I don't weigh in on subjects that have to do with veterans because I'm not one. I leave that up to people who are veterans and people actively serve. But in your examples that you presented, Vietnam and World War II, do you think they were less likely to talk about it because so many people were involved on a grand scale opposed to some of the modern day wars? I mean, we still have a lot of soldiers over there, but it's a
Yeah.
smaller count population wise versus the amount of men who were
Right.
drafted and enlisted during Vietnam and in World War II. Like the old
Well,
saying, we didn't talk about it because everybody was there.
Hmm.
yeah, I
That's
can kind of
fun.
yeah, I can kind of see that. And that's a good point. Also, I think that that group of people, we fought as a nation. We fought at home. We fought overseas, and no, we didn't fight at home, but we were fighting in spirit. We were behind our people, 150% foods, the rationing, the drives, everything. um I don't know, so there was pride that was shown, and it was understood. And I think a lot of the modern day veterans don't don't get that, and so maybe they want to talk about it to try and get some recognition. I don't know,
Well,
but
and I know from personal experience too, Roger, and you and I have talked a lot about this at you coffee shops or whatnot, is
yeah,
that some, like myself, get a lot of catharsis from talking about it and
yeah,
getting it out, almost like you're getting that darkness out. And the more you talk about it, the less it's inside to infect you. And so we have to be careful not to just assume that people that are verbose and talking about their
hmm,
experiences in the wars are braggarts and probably were actually in the rear with a gear, but that
right,
they maybe they're just like you said, they're hard chargers and they are proud of
hmm,
what they did, and of course, but maybe also they get catharsis from talking about it. And as you know, and you'll get into this here in a minute, but Don and I both know as well that interviewing these guys, that a lot of them, they want to talk about it because they don't want their buddies to be forgotten.
that's true. That's a good point. It's a
Yeah.
very good point. Yeah,
Now, Roger, I know your grandpa
Mhm.
died in 1990, and
yeah,
is that what really started you digging into his history?
yeah. I was going through some of his belongings. My grandmother had given me a box of stuff that she thought I'd be interested in, and in it was his wallet, which I still have around here somewhere. But in his wallet, it had his military ID, or his VA card, and there was a card in there that was his what do they call it? Medals card. It showed what medals he was authorized to wear. And so I'm looking at it, and I couldn't believe it. I was like, okay, there's the Pacific War ribbon and all this, and then Navy Cross. I'm like, what?
Oh my gosh.
I'm a Navy Cross. My grandfather got a Navy Cross, so I called my dad. I'm like, what is this? And he tells me that he shot down a kamikaze at Okinawa. And well, I'm like, okay, that's it. I'm hooked. Hook, line, and sinker. I got to find out now. This. I got a hero in my family. Let
Now,
let
for
let let's
our
find out.
listeners, can you explain the significance of the Navy Cross, where it is as far
Well,
as the rankings of medals that you?
the top medal is the Medal of Honor. Then every branch has its cross, and that is its top honor. I only know of one other Navy Cross recipient, and he was in, your grandfather's group at Iwo Jima. So that that's not a very common award. I mean, that
Here's
is the
the
topmost award.
Here is the official description from Wikipedia.
Yeah, yeah.
The
Let's
Oh,
Navy
hope.
great! Yeah,
Cross The Navy Cross is the United States military's second highest award of valor in combat. It is given to the members of the Navy, the Marine Corps, and the Coast Guard who have performed extraordinary acts of heroism or distinguished service. The Navy Cross can also be awarded to members of other armed services and foreign military personnel who served with the United States Naval Services.
Yeah.
So, to
There you
see
go.
that you're that
Yeah.
card, Navy Cross.
Mm-hmm.
So you're hooked.
Yeah. So
You're
I'm
hooked.
hooked.
And I earlier said that, he was on the LCIG 454, but at this point you don't know that yet, do you?
No, I didn't. I knew that he was on a landing craft. Landing craft, you immediately think of a Higgins boat.
For sure.
And I'm thinking, how could he have shot down a Japanese kamikaze from a Higgins boat? That's a hell of a shot, So I started asking around. I asked my dad, who had evidently, they were real close. My dad, my grandfather that we're talking about is my maternal grandfather, but they were, hunting buddies, fishing buddies. And it was the three of us, as I got older. But he came back, he said it was called an LCI. And I'm like, oh, LCI. Aha. Wait a minute. Isn't that boat I built?
Another piece.
Another piece falls together. So I start researching. I went to the library. I looked at, the different Jane's identification books. I looked at I had a massive book. I mean, it must have been like this thick, like that, of the Navy records or whatever that I checked out and went through and was reading through it. And I'm like, oh, so there's different types. I didn't know what, I was stumped. 1990, no internet.
You're talking about
books.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And you open it up, moths fly out. But I didn't. I hit a wall, and it was all just. It was frustrating because I wanted to know more, but he didn't talk much. My grandmother, when I talked to her about it, she mentioned a couple guys that they used to hang out with, and I made a note of that, and we'll talk about them later. But
so when was it that you finally got your break? Yeah, go ahead, Don.
Before we get too far from the Navy Cross, I want our listeners at home to realize. Now, granted, just like the Medal of Honor, I'm sure more people were deserving of it, but it comes down to who writes up the referral. Mm-hmm. In World War II, 3.4 million people served in the United States Navy in World War II. Out of those 3.4 million, according to records, approximately 4,000 Navy Crosses were issued. However, only 2,800 of those were issued to naval sailors. The other 1,000 went to Marines. So out of 8.10 million Navy personnel, your grandfather is one of 2,800 people to receive the Navy Cross in World War II.
Holy crap!
If that changes things for you at all, I just got cold chills reading that to you.
Yeah, I did too.
I got goosebumps.
Wow.
Holy shit! Excuse my French.
No, don't worry about it. I literally just got cold chills reading that to you.
Yeah.
God,
wow.
Man, you're going to be blown away when you hear the story.
Yeah.
But
my gosh. And actually, it was kind of your daughter who pointed you in the right direction inadvertently, wasn't it?
Yeah. It was a few years later, about 2002, 2001, about a year or so before you and I met. She had a project, genealogy, and so we wanted to know more about granddaddy, and what everybody did. So I'm thumbing through, and I'm like, I'm going to find some more information. We'll see what we can find. And I stumbled across NavSource, navsource.org. Awesome site.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah. So I type in LCI. By this time, I knew it was 454 because grandma had some letters from granddaddy that she let me read lot of black lines on them, because they were edited. But I knew it was LCI 454. So I started reading up on it. Now, by trade, I'm a mechanical designer engineer. So I love the techie side of stuff. So I really got into reading up on the ships. Got on the site, and here's these pictures of the ship. And I just was blown away. It just really whet my appetite. I just started digging in deeper. I found the amphibious group, that Amphibious Sailors Association, and LCI Association, and that's where we met. And but yeah, she kind of got me hooked. My daughter, yeah, doing that geology project. But there's a picture on NavSource. If you open up LCIG 454, it's the bow of the ship, and it's at it says location unknown, but after interviewing the sailors and everything, it was at Buckner Bay, Okinawa. There's a gentleman sitting up on the conning tower who is identified as Floyd Jones, the signalman. And there's a guy sitting on the gunwale of the forward Bofors 40 millimeter. I asked Floyd when I interviewed him, I said, "Who's the guy on the rail?" And he says, "Oh, that's your grandfather." And I'm like, "No way." He says, "Yeah, that's your grandfather. He used to get yelled at for sitting on the rail of the gunnel of his gun tub." And so there he is, immortalized on NavSource, sitting on the rail of his gun.
Now, for those that are listening right now, you'll go to navsource.org. You're going to click on amphibious, then you're going to click on LCI, and then you'll scroll to 454. It's an amazing website, and you get to see the picture awesome. That Roger's talking about.
Yeah, but it's I saw that picture, and then when Floyd told me that, I broke down, because there's the connection, there's the link. I've seen him, I see it, and then later I would get pictures from sailors and stuff, and of him there, and it's just, but that was the first
tell us about
I saw.
That. Tell us about tracking down these guys. You said that your grandmother had given you names, so probably that's where you started, right?
Yeah, I contacted, let me look through my notes here. I contacted 4 individuals. First guy was Paul Herrig. He was, I think he was a bosun on board the ship. I'm trying from memory. And then another gentleman, Floyd Jones, who was the signalman I just mentioned. A guy named Glenn Swindell, who was my grandfather's best friend on the ship, and who was actually my first physical interview was with Mr. Swindell, or Glenn. Sorry, Glenn. And then I interviewed Herman Rosenberg, who was captain of the ship.
Oh, wow. That's awesome.
Yeah. So it was, these 4 guys had some good stories,
Tell us about them. What'd you learn?
Okay. So another individual that I talked to who actually called me, he cold called me after I had talked. I think Mr. Rosenberg had given him my number, but his name was Carl Newman, Lieutenant JG on the boat. He was the, let me look at the title here.
Oh, gunnery officer.
Yeah, he was a gunnery officer. Gun tub captain is what they called him. He called me, and the first story it just blows me away. But they spotted at Peleliu. They had already done the invasion, and they were doing their patrols. The LCIs were slated to do patrols looking for the suicide boats. And while they were on patrol, they saw this Japanese soldier running on a sandbar that was parallel to the beach. And so Granddad took a shot at him, and he missed. Now, this is 40 millimeters Bofors. That's a good size gun, So he missed it. The guy turns and runs the opposite direction. So he cranks it, fires again, misses. Now, behind this, at that point, he swims to the shore towards this hill. And he goes up and he opens the camouflage door and then dives in the hill. So Granddaddy lines up, fires the shot. It goes into the door. Now, come to find out, this hill was an ammo dump. The round goes in and sets off everything, and it just huge explosion. I mean, Mr. Newman said it was amazing. It like somebody dropped 1,000-pound bomb right there. But he turned to Granddaddy and said, "I think you got him."
Yeah, I guess so.
I guess so. Yeah. But then
But you know what's kind of a pause you there for a minute. Someone who's very special to our podcast with Henry Sledge is his dad Eugene Sledge, of course, from With the Old Breed and the show The Pacific. You found out that his LVT actually went right beside you on its way in. You guys, your dad,
right.
Granddad, provided a rocket barrage, and there's great pictures of those.
Yeah, maybe we can post those.
Yeah, actually, I'll do that afterwards, and I'll put them on
Okay.
for the folks that watch the video, and we'll put the pictures up right at this moment, and they can see all the gunboats lined up, just thousands of rockets going in. It's one of my favorite pictures actually of World War II, because you see the gunboats all lined up off the beaches, and you just see just dozens and dozens and dozens of these LVTs all heading in a line, passing through the gunboats, and Eugene Sledge is there going right beside your grandpa. It's pretty cool.
Orange Beach 1 is where they went in.
And for those of you listening on Spotify or any of the other podcast apps, as always, whenever you listen to the episode of What's the Scuttlebutt podcast, if you simply go to WTSPWorldWar2.com, click on the homepage of the icon representing that particular episode, such as this one, we will have all the photos available to you, plus links to reach and access our guests. So if you want to see these photos that we're talking about right now, simply head over to WTSPWorldWar2.com, and they'll be there available for your viewing pleasure.
Yeah, there's one photo there that I hope we post that it shows the tactic that the LCIGs would do, and that is they would have is usually 8 to 10 ships, but you would have a rank of 5 or 4, and then a rank of 5 behind them, kind of staggered in a zigzag. And as the first rank launched their rockets, they would drop after they launched, they would drop back, and then that second rank would move forward, and they're loading. When they get in position, they fire, so that there's a constant barrage going, and they called it the jitterbug. And they would there's some footage there, some photos that perfectly show that, and it's just amazing.
Guys that were there said that the sound was like gods tearing giant sheets of silk, just like it. They said it was just awe. Just awe.
Yeah. I can only imagine. I've heard on some of the, our Navy at War, I think was the show that they showed one of them, and it was just ungodly. The sound. But
now the guys on the 454, I remember you were telling me about how that their rations had come down to where they were just eating this Australian canned.
Oh yeah. That's right. That's right.
Whatever. And your grandpa says today. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, he was hero for a day. They'd been eating bully beef, which is an Australian beef, but they said it was terrible. It was like eating just goat or something. Shoe leather, yeah. So they had been fishing. They'd pretty much made up some, the black gang had made up some fishing lines, and they'd pull in little fish here and there, but Granddad pulled in a tuna, and they fed on that sucker for a couple meals that day, and he was a hero. Everybody liked him, and it was always cool because that was Granddaddy's thing, was fishing. That's how he and I bonded. So I could just see him standing there with that big old fish, with that grin of his. But yeah, he pulled in a tuna.
Isn't it amazing the negative impact that the Australian military equipment had on our soldiers and sailors and Marines between their food and those damn Australian boots that they issued to the Marines who were there trying to get refitted and having to march and mess their feet all up, that they just finished their march barefoot. It's like, thanks for your attempt to replenish us, but you guys are causing more harm than good.
Yeah. was like Naga hide boots.
I know that must have been a huge deal because
That was crazy.
my grandpa's group, the ship 449, Hillman Ryan actually sent me a picture. They caught a giant barracuda, and all the crew. Unfortunately, we've got those pictures. All the crew took pictures with this giant barracuda. It was just great to mix up the diet there for a change. But
I bet
danger wasn't always from the Japanese.
Hold on, I just have a thought before we pass on, because we're talking about the catching of the fish and the consuming. You know, there's that country song where he's talking about you should have seen it in color. He's talking about his grandfather's flying B-17s. He's talking about, you should have seen it in color.
Mm-hmm.
I went on a cruise last year. Second time I've been on a cruise, but first time in 20 years. If we had World War II naval and Pacific footage in 4K HD, and you could see how blue that water actually, we see the black and white film, we see the colorized film. Most of us who live near bodies of water, unless you're out and down in Key West, even like in Miami, the water's greenish.
Mm-hmm.
The fact that they're out on these LCIs, these naval ships, in that cobalt blue water before the battle starts, and just as you're saying, catching fish, tuna, what have you, when the guns aren't flying, when the bullets aren't flying, and you're not hiding for your lives, what a crazy spectrum to go from being on this metal boat out in this beautiful, super clear water, catching this amazing fish, to the next thing, holy hell, I could be dead in 2 seconds. What a freaking spectrum to go on. And to be out there, and as that song says, to see it and be there in color, it's just, I think our minds would be blown if we actually had 2K, 4K equivalent of that combat footage now. It would just be completely different than how we think of World War II right now.
Yeah, that was really brought home to me many years ago. My first wife and I went on a cruise to the Bahamas, and we saw that blue water, and that's the first thing I thought of. I was like, wow, this is what the water looks like in the Pacific. This is probably what it looked like, when they cruised up onto these islands, and it just blew me away. I got choked up.
Yeah.
Thinking about it.
I had the same thought too, because I went to Bahamas, and the only thing I can think of is, damn, Carnival Cruise about nailed it, because the color of their blue of their ship is almost the exact same color as that blue water.
Yeah. But one of the things I want to tag on to what you're saying about, when they're not fighting and you're fishing, they were kids. These guys were kids on these boats, and there's stories of them, playing cards and, rat tail fights on the deck, and, sleeping out under the stars. It's just, just to go from that and then
high diving off the conning tower.
Yeah.
For an episode of the What's the Scuttlebutt, old man tells young kids what's what. Rat tail fights is when you take your towel, you tighten it up, you get it wet, and you do the whoosh. That's what a rat tail is.
Okay. All right, guys.
I think we did that in the high school and middle school gym, but I don't even think they change in gym class anymore, let alone take showers. Yeah. So I'm sure rat tails are day of yore. This probably went out in the 90s.
These guys would walk around on deck in their singlets or in their, boxers.
Stark ass naked.
In their deck shoes, or butt naked. Yeah. So different
nothing
times.
Like the welt from a rat tail.
Yeah, different times, but
yeah.
That
was a scene I developed in my book there that you read, Don, Saipan, where the guys were they just had a hard time. They're like this gorgeous coral and fish darting about, and there's this mass suicides happening right there in front of them. It's just so bewildering. And I'm glad you brought that up, because, we do tend to think of it being a drab place because we always see it in black and white. But I was thinking earlier about there was danger everywhere, though, and even and Roger, can you tell us about Mr. Swindell, Glenn Swindell, and how it doesn't have to be Japanese shooting at you for there to be some extreme.
That's right.
Real quick, just before we do that, because we've been talking about your grandfather, but I don't think in the last 55 minutes we've actually said your grandfather's full name and rank. For our audience who's listening, let's get your grandfather's name out there so people know who we're talking about.
Yeah, it's Thomas Howard Mixon, Mixon. He went by Tommy. He was a Motormac onboard LCIG 454. When he mustered out, he was a yeoman in Galveston to for the guys signing out or leaving the service. He did all the paperwork there.
Well,
But
motorback is engine room, but
engine room, black gang.
general quarters, he must have shown some significant ability as a gunner because, they obviously
Yeah,
they wanted him on the gun. So, you know,
he
it's
was
too bad
always a
we
dead
can't talk to
shot.
your grandpa about how that he was able to go from, engine room black gang in the engine room to all of a sudden at
That's
general quarters. His place isn't to run to the engines; it's to run to the bow 40.
yeah, on the bow, which is the gun. They were told. I
Yeah,
was always told by the sailors that that's the gun. All the others were backups because the G had 340 millimeters compared to the L's, which was the standard. So yeah, I've always wondered that, Dennis. I've always wondered how he got into that position. You know, but growing up hunting, squirrel hunting, that man could dot an eye from you know
yeah, for
50
sure.
yards with a 22. He was something else. But so Glenn Swindell was his best friend on board the ship, and I spent a weekend with him at his home in Dallas. Great guy. He was something else. I miss him. Um, when the LCIGs would load the rockets, uh, they would go below decks to launch them. And Glenn's job was to walk down the passageway between the racks along the sides of the bow and to check the rockets, make sure they were seated, and then he would go into the forward hold, which was underneath the bow gun. On one occasion, and I believe it was at I want to say it was at Peleliu. As he was moving along, he looks over and there's a rocket sputtering in the rack. They're sitting there going, and the fuse was misfiring. So he reaches over. Now this is a rocket. It takes two men to load into a rack. Okay. He reaches over, pulls the rocket out, and throws it into the water. So it sinks down. Huge explosion. Next to them is the LCIG 456. So both ships are covered in this huge splash of water. Basically, Glenn saved probably 150 men. Unfortunately, he was written up and was not given an award.
Why? Like why? Does
I don't
anybody
know.
know? What did Glenn? What did he surmise? Why did he think he was?
Glenn thinks that there was
What's so bizarre?
animosity between certain officers and the black gang and individuals that were of color.
Can you
Even though
explain the
Glenn
black
was
gang? What that means?
the black gang, it's an archaic term, goes back to the coal ship days that anyone who worked below deck was always covered in coal or oil or something. So they were black,
Yeah,
black hands, black face, whatever.
yeah. So it
And
denotes people that work in the engine rooms, around the engines and
yeah,
whatnot. Cool, for
engines,
instance. Yeah,
yeah, the bilge, all that. So they were looked down on, and there were certain times that that this happened. Things like this happened. There was always a captain's mast every day on board the 454
he's gracious.
for certain things. One guy was fair skinned, redhead. He got written up for his sunburn for having because having a sunburn all the time. He got
My
written
God,
up, and the term was damaging government property.
my
So,
goodness.
it's just yeah, it's interesting that this individual was. We'll talk some more about this individual later on in my grandfather's story, but
So
I
we go
interviewed
from. I'm sorry.
I interviewed many of the officers, and not all the officers were like this. Some were, I guess, if it, the privileged background
How many
versus
of the crew
the
did you track down and interview?
uh before I talked to you, probably 25. And
Wow.
then after that, after I, got involved with the landing craft infantry or the amphibious group, another 20
Wow.
or so. Yeah.
That's
I
exceptional.
I interviewed individuals from the 454 and other ships in the group in the flotilla, and some that were in Flotilla 13, which was a group that supported Flotilla 3. They
Black
were
Cats.
Black Cats. They had mortars instead of rockets, and so they supported us. And I talked to, I don't know, about 8 or 9 of their guys. I actually got a button from one of them that's got their logo on it.
You
So
know,
cool.
Don and I've talked, and Jeff, who Jeff couldn't be with us tonight, but we talk a lot that, Jeff and they're very thankful they got to meet World War II veterans, but Roger, you and I were very fortunate to be, we were
Very.
interested in it back then, and we've been able to interview just literally dozens and dozens and dozens and in my case hundreds of, and then
Hmm.
and for you to be able to not, and especially to be able to interview 40 plus guys directly associated with your grandfather, like,
Yeah.
you talk
Yeah.
about getting a complete story. You definitely got one. And
Yeah.
we know that your grandpa was at, he went through the Marianas, he went through
Hmm.
Peleliu, and then he didn't go to Iwo. There, the group
No.
was divided up. My grandpa's group went to Iwo, and we did that podcast already. And your
Yeah.
grandpa's group then went to
Hello, Luke.
Peleliu.
Yeah.
And my grandpa's group then went to Iwo in February of 45. Your grandpa went to
Hmm.
Peleliu in September of 44. My grandpa went to Iwo Jima. And then your grandpa went to Okinawa.
Right.
And
Right.
that's where the story converges on the Navy Cross.
Yes. The Navy Cross. Yes. Um, so when I interviewed Mr. Swindell, and the story that I first gathered was that they were at Okinawa and were on suicide watch. Now,
So, let me just,
yeah,
I want to set the scene for everybody. Like,
sure,
everybody's familiar with the kamikazes. It's not, but it's just not aircraft. There were also
that's true.
boats and
Boats,
suicide
yes,
swimmers and suicide boats. And
yeah,
what I want
and
people to,
barges,
and I
yeah,
want the listeners and the viewers to realize and to contemplate is, just remember how you felt on September 11th when you didn't know if there were going to be other planes out there hitting, other
hmm
buildings in Chicago or in Dallas or in Los Angeles, and everybody had that fear, and they were grounding all
right,
the aircraft. Now multiply that by 1,000. Okay,
right,
how you felt that day, because at Okinawa there are planes diving out of everywhere day after day after day after day, and then at night you get no respite. The boats are
right,
coming in, the barges are coming in, the suicide swimmers are coming in, and you're seeing explosions on the horizon. You're seeing ships beside you get
hmm
pummeled and blasted. So to us in our comfort to be sitting here and just say, yeah, we were on suicide watch. This is a significant event going down, and guys are
right.
sure they're all going to die, and they've seen, and by the way, it was so bad. Did you know that the US Navy lost more men in World War II than the Marine Corps? A
Hmm.
lot of folks don't know that. They lost almost 3 times as many men as then
Yeah,
did the Marines in World War II. And the kamikaze had a lot to do with that. So
right.
please tell us about.
Yeah. Now, based on this, I want to add to that picture. This is just after the Bunker Hill was hit.
Oh,
I don't know
wow.
if you've seen the footage of the
Yeah.
elevator being blown into the air. This is right after that. So the story is that they were on suicide watch, and on suicide watch, little technical info: the guns on the ship are electric, and you power them up. You have to ask permission to power them up to fire them, because so on suicide watch they're automatically powered, and the targeter or the trigger man has joy at any time to fire. So the story is that they're
So he
on
doesn't have to
suicide.
ask permission.
He doesn't have permission. No,
Okay.
he just calls Joy. I'm calling such and such. There's a target. I'm firing. Um, so the guns are powered, and they periodically have to change the barrels out of the guns. This was a single barrel Bofors. And matter of fact, one of the sailors told me about one of the barrels curling on them. It got so hot. But they were changing it out, and Granddaddy and his uh, partner on the gun both spotted kamikaze coming in. And so as soon as they put the barrels in, they tracked it over to the left, followed it, and shot it, blowing it up before it could hit a nearby ship. That's the story I was told. The story that I gathered. Now the second story is, I get choked up when I talk about it. Dennis, you know this. This was told by me by Glenn and verified by Floyd Jones and Carl Newman. Floyd Jones is signalman. Newman is the gun tub captain. So on the tub of the gun, this is when I call it a tub, it looks like a big bathtub, like one of the big watering troughs that you see out on the ranch,
Like
big old
water
metal
tank.
thing. Yeah. And it's got a doorway cut in at the rear of it. Now, on each side of the door is a pinion. It's about 5 foot tall, just a rod that sticks up. And that is the limit of the gun, that the gun is supposed to go to turn left or right, port or starboard. And this is on each side of the walkway. Now they spotted the aircraft and they spun the gun, and they tracked it back so far that the gun hit the pinion, and then he fired and hit the kamikaze. Now he hit it with one shot and
Wow.
blew the kamikaze up 100 feet off the fantail of a nearby battleship. The
That's
battleship flickered back to Floyd Jones. Thank you, 454. Mighty fine shooting was
wow.
their flicker. Now, at the time, the captain was taking a nap. He didn't know the gun was on suicide watch. He heard the gun go off. He comes up. He sees the pinion bent, knocked down. Immediately orders my grandfather to be, put in chains, put in the brig. So much of a stink was raised about it that he was wanted to fire a court martial. So they took Granddaddy, Lieutenant Newman, the left seat, who was Glenn Johnson, and the loader, Glenn Swindell, over to this battleship with the captain. They go over and they gave their testimonies, and then they had a recess. Now they had an admiral and his staff there, overseeing the court martial. During the recess, the admiral and his staff take the captain out in the hallway, and they said they could hear yelling and hollering outside. Then, so after a time, I don't know how long passed, the admiral comes back in with this team. Granddaddy's brought back in chains. He's sitting in a chair. I imagine a long table, with the officers there, a single chair with him sitting in it, just shaking in his boots,
Sure.
And then, they call everyone to attention to give the sentence. And the admiral says, as he stands up, he says, "We hereby our decision based on the account and based on your actions, we hereby award you the Navy Cross. And saluted him. This is Bull Halsey
Oh, wow.
saluting my grandfather.
Wow.
Bull Halsey on board a battleship. He was there inspecting the battleship.
Wow.
And just so happens that that round hit just right on that kamikaze and kept it from hitting the fantail where all the fuel and ammo
Yeah.
for the rear guns are stored.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Tell us about the significance of that battleship.
So I grew up outside of Houston in a town called Deer Park. Deer Park itself is near Baytown, the Port of Houston, and San Jacinto Monument. San Jacinto Monument was built. It looks like the Washington Monument, but it's taller because we have a star on it. Ha ha ha. Just kidding. The significance of that spot is where Sam Houston won the revolution against the Mexican army, Santa Anna. That's where he surrendered. Moored at the San Jacinto Monument for many years up until recently was a battleship of Texas. My grandfather used to take me there all the time to go by and see the ship. There was a couple of other vessels there too. We'd go and walk. At that time, when I was a kid, you could go anywhere on the ship. Not once did he tell me that battleship he saved was that ship he took me to visit at that park.
Wow. Goodness.
BB-36.
Wow.
For the sake of the audience who is listening and they're trying to visualize your grandfather shooting this kamikaze, can you give us a description of the said kamikaze? Is it a flat bottom boat? Is it a 32-foot long boat? Is it an 18-foot long boat? Can you give us a description?
It was a plane.
A plane? Okay.
No, it was a plane. It was a Zero.
Okay.
Yeah.
I thought maybe it was a boat because we went as far
No.
as saying earlier on Suicide Watch you had swimmers, boats.
Right.
So
yeah,
a kamikaze airplane as we know it, a Zero.
Yeah. The plane actually was what is interesting. It started on the port side. It came across the bow, but it was so low it had a rooster tail coming off the water behind it.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so it would have hit the fantail at the water line. I mean, it was the sweet spot. It would have hit.
Wow.
So, yeah.
Well, I appreciate you coming on and giving us a story about your grandfather.
Amazing.
Yeah.
And we'll have you on for a follow-up episode out of the interest of time. But
Sure.
I thought, it's not World War II related, but we've talked about my grandfather on here a few times. And we've talked about in the past that due to the fire that we have very limited information on my grandfather. Mm-hmm. But I wanted to share this because I was just up in Kentucky because my mom just had triple bypass heart surgery, which is why I was up in Kentucky right at the end of Helene and then had to come home early for the hurricane to prep for.
I hope she's okay.
Yeah, she's actually getting ready to get released to a 24-hour care facility until she can prove, well, basically because they had to open up her chest, she can't lift any weight whatsoever. And so until her body heals to a point where she can go home and live by herself, she has to live in a 24-hour care facility.
We're having similar issues with my mother.
But I purposely went up there 4 days prior to her surgery just in case, because I hadn't seen her in 2 years. So while I was up there, she was able to present something to me that I took a photo of because I knew this family history, but I never talked about it because so many people claim this family history. But she actually showed the picture that my grandmother, she gave me the notebook paper that my grandmother wrote our family tree down, and I took a photo of it. And I want to share this, and then we'll briefly get into what you're reading. So, going back in time here, there was once this gentleman named Robert James. Robert met this interesting woman with a very unique name who became his wife. Her name was Zerelda Cole. So Robert and Zerelda got married. And Robert's brother was a gentleman by the name of John James. And John met a young lady named Linda Elizabeth, who became Linda and Elizabeth James. So Linda Elizabeth James and John James had 8 kids. And out of those 8 kids, number 7 was a young gentleman by the name of Preston Coleman Woods. That's my grandfather. Linda Elizabeth James married William Clarence Woods. So William Clarence Woods is my great-grandfather. Preston Coleman Woods is my grandfather from Ridgewood, Kentucky, who went off, as we previously said, to work grave registration.
Mm-hmm.
Now, for those of you who are dual historians, who enjoy the wild, wild west, you're thinking, Robert and Zerelda Cole James, why do I know those? Well, see, Robert and Zerelda had 2 sons. Keep in mind, my grandfather's grandfather was Robert's brother. So Robert James was my grandfather's mom's uncle or brother-in-law through marriage. So once again, Robert James, Zerelda Cole got married. John James was Robert James's brother. John James was my grandfather's dad. Robert and Zerelda James had 2 sons by the name of Frank and Jesse James. So I've been told my entire life that Frank and Jesse James, the Outlaws, were related to me, but I never talked about it because you hear it all the time. Jesse James, the motorcycle guy, talks about it, and I've been wanting, I need to know this family tree. And so here it is. Mm-hmm. That is how I am related to Frank and Jesse James. My grandfather's mother is the sister-in-law.
Very direct line.
Is the sister-in-law to Frank and Jesse James' mother and father.
Yeah, that's pretty wild.
Yeah, so
that's impressive. That's impressive.
It's So Frank.
Wild.
So Frank and Jesse James. Frank was born in 1844. Jesse was born in 1847. The fact that Linda Elizabeth James, who was the daughter of John James, i.e., so Jesse and Frank James was Linda's uncle and was my grandfather's mother. The fact that Linda and William Clarence Wood had 8 kids in the late 18 and early 1900s, and they all lived, is tremendous. So yeah, just for clarity, Robert James' brother, John James, married Linda Elizabeth James, who was my grandfather's mother. So essentially, my grandfather's uncle was the parents to Frank and Jesse James. That is pretty crazy.
That's pretty cool.
That is cool.
Yeah.
That is really cool.
So, Dennis, what you reading?
I am reading Lee Miller's War. Female war correspondent in World War II. Kate Winslet is going to be coming out in the movie about her. And I got to say, she resembles Lee Miller incredibly. But great writing. It reminds me a lot of reading the work of Andy Rooney. Just, good stuff. She's a photographer as well. So, she's out there.
For those of you who aren't aware of the name, but you're World War II historians and you love looking at photos, there's a very famous photo of a very attractive war correspondent sitting in a bathtub. You can see her double buckle boots laying on the floor in her uniform. That's her.
Yeah.
Okay. I follow you. I track now. Yeah.
Not the attractive wasp who's in the airplane that we all fell in love with. This is the war correspondent that's in the bathtub. But yeah.
Right.
Yeah, it's a great read. Everybody should get it. It's tremendous. She's something else. And I look forward to seeing the movie actually too.
Yeah.
What are you reading?
Well, I finally finished my book on the Merrill's Marauders, and I was going through my library here at home, and I'm like, I've got all these books on the Pacific. I've read all those, and not all of them, but most of them. I'm very familiar with the Pacific and European theater. And I got to looking around, and I came across a gift pack that I've had for about a year and a half now. And it's from a listener of ours who went to the Arizona Memorial down in Pearl Harbor, and she sent me and Jeff and Henry at the time gift packs. And here's the post that she wrote. This package relates to my email sent back in 23. If you have no idea, blah, blah, blah. Anyhow, she sent me a book and some other pamphlets, and so I broke out, and once again, that was Rona. So Rona, I'm reading the book you got me, Pearl Harbor, The
Oh, wow.
Survivors.
That's cool.
And it's very cool because, as this book points out, when we all think about Pearl Harbor, we think about Battleship Road and, a few of the Marines. But this thing goes into detail and then talks to the people who were there at the different compounds, Air Corps bases, different areas throughout the islands, and you're getting firsthand accounts. Now, I started reading this 3 weeks ago, but then I ended up in Kentucky for 10 days and then dealing with hurricanes down here. So when I got started onto it, I'm only 26 pages in, but it's fantastic. It's got photographs. It's the firsthand accounts are crazy. Just in the 26 pages, I've heard stories and learned more about Pearl Harbor than I previously did. Because, we all talk about Pearl Harbor being the start. We all know the date. We all know what happened. Right. But very few, a lot of us don't dig deep into it. And so to hear these firsthand accounts. And so this is Pearl Harbor, The Survivors, The Oral History of 24 Servicemen by Harry Spiller. It's by McFarland Press. Once again, I'm only 26 pages into it. But I couldn't put it down when I first started reading it for like the day and a half I read it before I was going to take it with me on the plane, but my pack was so full that I figured once I got on the plane I had no place to put it. Which, by the way, I took a horrible Frontier flight to Kentucky. It's a direct flight. It's cheap. You're sitting in a lawn chair that there's no leg room. I'm 6'5", stuck in the middle seat because I refused to pay. But because of the hurricane, Frontier, you cannot cancel your flight. You can't talk to anybody until your flight's 24 hours out. So when you call them, you give them your confirmation number. Guess what? Your flight's 3 days away. We're not talking to you. So I had to book a flight home and pay an extra flight. So I said, the hell with Frontier. I'm booking for Southwest. The downside of Southwest is a lot of times you get layovers. On the cheaper flights, there's no direct flight. So I left Erlanger, Kentucky, outside of Cincinnati, and actually had to fly to Chicago. And I just assumed I was, it didn't occur to me when I saw the name of the airport, Midway, what it was named after. And so I get out of the airplane in Concourse C, and I'm walking through, and lo and behold, there's a big-ass airplane mounted from the ceiling. And I walk through the Battle of Midway memorial that they have dead nuts in the middle of the Midway airport because it's named after the Battle of Midway. And it was awesome. And from what Jeff tells me through the post I posted, that throughout that big-ass airport, there's multiple different displays to it. So I only saw one of the apparently 2 or 3 airplanes mounted in this place.
Oh, wow. That's pretty cool.
And if you guys go to our Instagram page and our Facebook page for What's the Scuttlebutt, you can see the photos and the very cool statue that they had there in Concourse C, where I got to spend 5 hours waiting on my flight to Kentucky.
Oh, boy.
But yeah, so that's where we're at on there. What you reading, fine sir?
Myself?
Mm-hmm.
I am reading a book. I was just looking it up here, get the title because it's on my Kindle. It's called Tiger Command. It's a novel based on the true story of combat on the Russian front.
Oh, wow.
The tank commanders. Which is kind of interesting because on my dad's side, I have a great uncle that was conscripted into the Wehrmacht and was a tank commander.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And I want to dig in and find out about him, but language barrier and all that. So well, that's
I've got somebody that might be able to help
list.
you with that too.
A
guy named Rolf Stibbe. Actually, we're thinking about. I need to talk to you, Don and Jeff, about him. I'd like to get him on a podcast.
I'm down for it. We cover a lot of European theater stuff here. We cover a lot of Pacific stuff here. I'm all about, if we have anybody. And for
he's fluent in German. He's English speaking, but he's fluent in German. He just interviewed 2 guys from U-boats last week.
Oh, nice.
So for those you listen at home, maybe you're an expert on Russian stuff, the Italy, the Italian stuff, the African, any other areas of the war. There's just World War II is such a wide swath that it's hard for people to be experts in everything. We all find our little niche groups. And so if you're listening, you say, how come we never do anything about the North African campaign? Or how come we never do anything on the Eastern Front? If you are very familiar with that, you think you can come on and provide content for an hour, please reach out to us. We'd love to have you on. Email us at mailcall@WTSPWorldWar2.com, mailcall@WTSPWWII.com. And so please, we want to share more information. Just, it's a lot of reading. And
Absolutely.
That's kind of ironic because the European theater was always my specialty because my family was, my family's German. So, then you find out you got a hero in the Pacific. So
I did an interview. I started this podcast in 2018. I did an interview back then, and it's up on our website. And I've re-aired it a few times. Now, it was an interview I did on site at a very large house with 14-foot ceilings, a lot of marble slab, very well-to-do family. So sadly, a lot of echo in there. But this guy was 6 or 7 years old, German-born, and he's talking about when the Americans came to his village and they were fighting the Weimar and the Germans, and like 85 years later, he still. During the interview, he breaks down crying because he can remember him and his uncle hiding up in their attic and listening to the German soldier begging for someone to help him and the gunfight going on outside. And he was talking about how, as a German youth, the indoctrination at school was so severe that as a 6-year-old, when you walk into a room full of adults, the adults shut up for fear that you're going to go rat them out to your teacher. Because the government and the education turn their children into little tattletales, little spies, if you will. And so, as we all know, not all the Germans agreed with the propaganda, what was going on by their government, just like a lot of Americans don't agree with what our government does now. And so they're having adult conversation, and here comes 6-year-old little Werner, and they just shut up or change the subject because for fear that your own child would rat you out and you would get taken away because something you said in front of your kid. And your kid's not doing it maliciously. He's just doing his duty as he was trained to do at school. Yeah. And so he was talking about that, and he also talks about how his brother, he had to go fight. His brother was, I think, 8 years old, 10 years older than him. And so his brother was 17, 18 years old, and he went off to fight. And it was a very good interview. The sound quality, not quite, it was great. Plus, back then, I didn't have the same microphones I do now. But, I was lucky enough to get that interview. So that is on our website, WTSPWorldWar2.com. If you go to the menu, look for those who were there. You can see all our veteran interviews. I think we're up to about 8 or 9 veteran interviews now. And so, those are all there as well. But, don't forget, sign up for Patreon. Head over to WTSPWorldWar2.com. We're doing the Patreon giveaway at the end of the month. For myself, Mr. Dennis Blocker Jr., and Roger Gray. Roger, thank you so much for sharing a fantastic story.
Thank you for coming on, Roger.
And it was a privilege of mine to give you cold chills to explain how rare your grandfather's Naval Cross was.
Let me tell you, it's quite an honor to be here. Dennis has talked about the program. I've listened to several of your podcasts, and I'm just really, really thrilled to be here. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for coming on, and thank you guys for listening, because, if you didn't listen, we wouldn't have no one to talk to. We'd just be 3 crazy nutballs talking into the microphone for absolutely no reason. But we will talk to you all next week.
This has been a Digital 410 production.